My name is Owen Griffiths, and I'm the Minister for the South East Wales Presbytery, or the Presbyterian Church of Wales. Just to give it a little bit of background on myself, I come originally from Maesteg. I was born into a family that lived on a council estate in Maesteg, the youngest of 3 brothers. And my early years were really dominated by the experience of poverty. We didn't have the kind of things that are taken for granted today. We didn't have a car. We didn't have a television for large parts of the 70s and 80s when I was growing up. Didn't have a washing machine. So my mother had to wash everything by hand, which is not an easy task with 3 boys in the house. My mother also had to make most of our clothes. And my father made almost all our furniture, our beds, our cupboards, our dining table. I remember one time when my middle brother was without a coat for the winter, and my mother had no material to sew from, so she took her only winter coat, cut it up, and sewed him a new coat for the winter, which meant that she had to go through the whole winter without a coat herself. But sometime during the 70s, my parents realized that they had another kind of poverty, I guess, which is a poverty of meaning. They realized that their lives lacked meaning, and so they began to search. And they searched in various places, in particular the Hare Krishna movement. But then ultimately, they found their way into the Christian church. My father was a singer, and he was about to give a concert locally where he would be singing arias from Handel's Messiah. And one day in work, he was practicing as he was going about his work and singing, "The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light." And a Christian came to him and asked him, "Do you know the meaning of the words that you're singing?" And he had to say, "Well, no, I don't." And so the Christian explained the gospel to him then, and my father was converted. And he led my family into a church in Maesteg, where I was then from the age of 10. For me, I didn't have an experience of conversion as such. I had always known the gospel. I'd grown up in Sunday school. It seemed like a natural progression for me. One of the things about poverty, though, is that it has a legacy. No, more than a legacy. Actually, it belongs to poverty, which is shame. Shame isn't a symptom of poverty. It is part and parcel of what poverty is. And I remember growing up very much with that sense of shame, and that persisting even after becoming a Christian, which is confusing in some respects, because the grace of God is the antidote to shame. But even becoming a Christian, even knowing that God accepted me completely with radical hospitality, it didn't eradicate that sense of shame that I grew up with. And I carried it through the rest of my life, still to a large degree carry it now. It's one of the effects of poverty. Eventually, I managed to find my way to university. I went to London, to Imperial College in London, but my overwhelming sense when I was there was that I didn't deserve to be there, because that's what shame is. Shame is a sense that we are bad and don't deserve acceptance, don't deserve to be accepted or loved, in fact. And so I didn't feel that I deserved to be there. And for that reason, perhaps, I didn't concentrate so much on my studies as on my rugby career. My whole time was taken up with playing rugby. Eventually, somehow, I graduated and I managed to find myself a job. I had a heart for the valleys, for the South Wales valleys, and I wanted to come back and work within the valleys in order to help the church. And so that's what I did. I had a job as a civil engineer locally and spent 8 years working as a civil engineer and helping out with church work as well, until the time when the church recognized my calling to the ministry. And I decided to resign as a civil engineer, go back to London and train for the Christian ministry. Why I went to train as a minister, I think there are a number of complex reasons for it, some of which I was aware of at the time. I had a passion for the church, I had a passion for God's people, and I wanted to use the gifts that God had given me. But other reasons perhaps only became clear to me after a great deal of reflection after the event. And one of those was that I was trying to escape my sense of shame. I was convinced that I could only be accepted by God if I was committed. And what better way to show that commitment to God and earn his acceptance than by becoming a minister and working in the church. So I went to London and I trained for a couple of years in London. Again, I wanted to come back to the valleys. I really had a heart for the valleys and wanted to minister here. And one day I had a phone call to come and preach in the Rhondda, in a little village called Blaenllechai, in a tiny little church with a very small congregation. And it was actually this church that I came to. And walking in, I saw that they had a very attractive organist, and began chatting to this organist about all kinds of things. And we had a conversation about Arius Thomas. I know nothing about Arius Thomas, but I managed to blag my way through and somehow proved quite effective, because I ended up marrying Angharad, the organist, and coming here as the minister of Carmel Chapel in Blaenllechai. I think it was the experience of being a minister of this church that really opened my eyes to the true power of the gospel. The effort, the constant effort of trying to figure out how best I can love the people in my congregation led me to really understand a bit more about the grace of God and what that means for people's lives. Discovering more about how Christ is the answer to people's shame, is the answer not just to our sin, but our experience of life in the here and now. And I think being welcomed into this church, and continually being welcomed into this church, was for me an experience of that grace, as though God's grace is somehow communicated far more effectively, not just through it being told, but actually through it being experienced in the grace that's being shown to us by God's people. My experience as a minister was one of acceptance and welcoming by the people here. And that, more than anything else, has done more to undermine that lingering poverty that I have in my life, and to set me free from that sense of shame.